All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. Doing something kind of special today. There's a mod coming out very soon. Supposedly, it's going to come out before 2025 is over, presumably around Christmas. That's very common with mod releases. But, of course, what I'm talking about is the long awaited Lord of the Rings mod for Attila Total War, Dawnless Days. It's finally coming out, unless they postpone it, but it will probably come out very soon, within the next 50 days. I'm very excited. A lot of my friends who play Total War are very excited. And, I've been kind of in a Lord of the Rings mood because of it. I've been thinking about the lore. I've been thinking about the factions that are going to be playable. So I decided to make this video. Could be like a fun little thing. And if you guys like it, I might make more of these. So, yeah, let's begin with number one. All right. With number one, the Corsairs of Umbar. Now this, if you're a history fan, should be pretty obvious what they were inspired by. Speaking of course, the Barbary pirates of the Maghreb of Northwest Africa. And, Umbar is supposed to be their stronghold and somewhere south of Gondor along the coastline of Harad. And that's supposed to be similar to, for the Corsairs, the Barbary coast. So Algeria, Tunisia, parts of Morocco, and even the way their ships look. Like if you look in the movie, the kind of the black sails and the kind of smaller size compared to European ships, so that they can be like very mobile, and they raid coasts and then they retreat. Very similar to how the Corsairs of Umbar did as well. They wouldn't conquer; they would just raid, and all of the time they would capture slaves, and that's what the Barbary pirates were famous for, the slave trade. Another similarity between them, which I didn't really think of until I decided to make this video, is a lot of the most notorious pirates among the Barbary pirates were actually what they call renegades. So Europeans who switched sides, converted to Islam, and that parallels really well with how the rulers of Umbar, and therefore the rulers of all the Corsairs, were what Tolkien called the Black Numenoreans. So like Numenoreans who chose to side with Sauron, who became evil. And that's very similar. And also, of course, the word itself, Corsair, for Corsairs of Umbar, that's taken from vocabulary that was used by Europeans from like the time period when the Barbary pirates were the most active. So like 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, I think all the way up until the 1800s, until France conquered Algeria and put a stop to them. Alright, so the next one are the Easterlings, also called the Men of Rune or Men of Run. I always get that wrong. But this one was kind of tricky. I always found this confusing because the way they looked in the movies kind of doesn't match exactly how they were described in the books. So I'm going to base it more on how they were described in the books rather than their movie portrayal. Also in the movies, they were only shown very, very briefly. I think during that one scene where they're entering through the Black Gate and Frodo and Sam, they're considering following in because the gate's opening to let them in. But based on the books, it's more clear that they're like the name says, the Easterlings. They're supposed to represent these various people to the east of Europe, usually nomadic, usually horsemen, usually wearing kind of light armor. In the movie, it's more confusing because they're like infantry and they're wearing very heavy armor, and it's kind of a mismatch. But the word rune itself in the Elven language means east, so makes sense. Men of Rune, men of the east. And if you look at a map of Middle Earth, the area to the east are these like flat grasslands, just like you see in Europe, the Pontic Caspian steppe, and then you go further, it's like Central Asia, it's very flat. You have all these various steppe people that live there, Mongols, Avars, Huns, all kinds of like Turkic tribes. The Turkic homeland is in that area. The Mongols, of course, are also right next to that. And then even like before that, during the classical age, you had various like Iranic people, like the Scythians and Sarmatians and so on, Alans. So it's always been this place where these very fierce nomadic people would arise and then go outwards and kind of conquer more sedentary populations, more agricultural populations. So the same thing in Lord of the Rings, the Easterlings, historically, there were like multiple periods where they were fighting Gondor, where they were fighting the allies of Gondor. So it's very similar to that. Definitely inspired by them. And then also in just like in Lord of the Rings, where they come in these waves, in real life, there's waves of different nomads. Before the Mongols, you had the Avars. After the Avars, you had the Magyar, and so on. It's just like over and over and over again. It's like a constant source of threat for like Europe, but also constant. And same thing with Middle Earth. It's a constant threat that never really gets resolved for the like free people of Middle Earth. So the next one are the Haradrim, also called the Southrons. And these are very obviously kind of influenced by like North African cultures, especially in the Northwest, like Berbers that Europeans had a lot of contact with because of Al-Andalus and various subsequent dynasties that came from Northwest Africa. And from like how they're described in terms of their like skin color, they're like adapted to a warmer climate. They wear a lot of gold and like scarlet, like red clothing, also very associated with the Maghreb. Riding Mumakil, elephants, war elephants, also kind of evokes Carthaginians and again like North Africa. And then the word Harad apparently also means like wilderness. So from like Gondor's perspective, to the south was like this dangerous wilderness. The climate is dangerous. The people are like dangerous. They're more aligned with Sauron, and so it makes a lot of sense. And then also they're described as living in kind of like tribal confederations. That's very similar to Berbers, especially during that time. It was like clan-based, tribe-based, and also they used a lot of like shock troops, which were also very much associated with troops from the Maghreb. And the next one, and this one's a bit different because so far we've been talking about groups that are inspired from outside of Europe. This one, the men of Dunland, or the Dunlandings, they, based on everything, they seem to be influenced by Celtic people, kind of like Celtic people living on the edges of like Anglo-Saxon England. And it would make sense that Tolkien would have thought about them a lot, because the Rohirrim, of course, were largely based on Germanic people, on the Anglo-Saxons. And so, the biggest historical enemy of the Rohirrim were the men of Dunland. And they took their land, right? That's part of the story. That also parallels Germanic people landing in Britannia, taking land, pushing the Celts westwards into what's today Wales, into what's Scotland. Kind of like rugged terrain, hilly terrain. It's not as good for agriculture, so there's a lot of resentment. It's kind of like the Anglo-Saxons and the Rohirrim, they took the good farmland, the flat land, and they pushed the locals or natives into the hills. And then even the way they're physically described, the men of Dunland, they have darker hair, they're shorter than the Rohirrim, and that's similar to, if you look at like height data, the Anglo-Saxons were taller than the locals who they were fighting. And the Rohirrim, like throughout the books, they're always called blonde. In the movies, they're blonde. And same thing with the Anglo-Saxons. They came from like Scandinavia, northern Germany. They tend to have light hair. So it's very it's kind of interesting how Tolkien added. I kind of like that he added a group of like evil men who are also within Europe. And speaking of which, the last one are the Black Numenoreans, and they're not called that because of their skin color or anything, but they're supposed to be, the kin of Gondor, of Arnor, who rejected their people and they sided with Sauron. So that's kind of like I mentioned earlier with the Corsairs of Umbar. Their ruling class were these Black Numenoreans, and I guess what they would have been influenced also, other than by Europeans who joined the Corsairs, is also early on in Ottoman history. There were a lot of like Byzantine Greeks who would join the early Ottomans for varying reasons, but a lot of the time was because, you know, someone would inherit a lot of land, and you know, the younger son, he wouldn't receive anything, and so he would hold a grudge, and so his way of getting revenge was by joining the Ottomans and kind of raiding his family, who, you know, he didn't consider family anymore because they, you know, screwed him over and took his inheritance. That was a very common thing, and I've even heard the word renegade comes from this. These converts to Islam, these Byzantine converts to Islam, were very often called renegades. So yeah, kind of a lot of interesting parallels between the two. And that's it for this video. If you guys like this, if you want me to do more videos similar to this, like describing which of the good factions were inspired by real life cultures, let me know. And see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.